everyone, I'm Chelsea.
And I'm Bianca.
And welcome back to the Preservice PODSQUAD podcast.
So today we're joined by Chris Cannella, who is a social studies teacher from Essex County, but he also is the chairperson of the NJEA Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Committee. So we're really excited to have Chris as a guest today, and we're hoping that we can learn more about LGBTQIA plus advocacy and how to best support our future students in the classrooms who are so diverse and coming into our space with so many different identities. So Chris, do you want to say hello to everyone first?
Hi, everybody. First, Chelsea and Bianca, thank you for having me. I appreciate this opportunity to, talk to folks who are looking to get into the field. Obviously, we need more of them, with what's going on out there. This is I'll tell a little background. This is my 25th year in education. I've been a social studies teacher at Cedar Grove High School, teaching global studies, U.S. history, contemporary history. I've been, up until this year, the GSA, Gender Sexuality Alliance Advisor. For 10 years, I helped produce our plays and musicals. And I think one of the highlights is in 2012, and I can't believe it's been 14 years, but in 2012, we directed and produced the Laramie Project. And, we used some NJEA Pride funds to do a community outreach around that. Obviously, the story of Matthew Shepard and how he was brutally beaten and the lessons behind that. So obviously I like using the roles in school that I play, whether through theater, through the Gender Sexuality Alliances. A long time I worked with student government to bring those messages of social justice, acceptance, tolerance, and making the schools safe for our people. I also serve as the first vice president of Essex County. For a long time, up until this year, I was the local president in Cedar Grove, but I kind of stepped aside and, let some other folks come in and do the work, because, there are a lot of us and we have some really talented people who we should make room for and make space for to allow them to do the work.
Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your background. I really appreciate that. Can you touch a little bit about the project that you did in school, just for anyone who's unfamiliar with it, before we jump in?
So, Cedar Grove is somewhat of a conservative community. And, it's years ago, it's 12 years ago now, I had actually, I was trying to look for a play and I wanted to do something that we can incorporate some, educational pieces into it. And somebody had suggested that we do the Laramie Project. Now, obviously, doing a play like that in a community like this, we were kind of taking a risk that there would be backlash. There was mild backlash, and my co-producer or my co-director, kind of handled it and talked to some of the parents and said, "Look, if we can't do what we need to do as educators, we're not going to be able to serve our students best." And we did. We moved forward and we produced it in a little black box. We actually created a black box theater at the high school, and it was performed 5 nights. We sold out in front of 60 people a night. After each play, we did a little bit of, after a couple of the performances, we did a talk back session, having a discussion with the community about the issues and what they saw and what they heard, and allowing the students to express themselves and the fears that they have. So it went well. It was taken well, and I want to juxtapose that to last year in this community where there was outrage because the musical that was selected, and now I haven't been involved in the program for about 5 years. The musical that was selected was the Prom, and the board said no, you can't do it. And a couple students and some alumni had started to organize. They called the press. Word got out, and then within 48 hours, the board said, "Okay, you could do it, but you have to do the high school version." And that production moved forward. It was good to see the students stand up, because it was the students that decided that this was unfair, and they reached out to their parents, and they reached out to folks in the community. I reached out to the press, and the show went on, and I was very proud of my students. So just one of the highlights that I'm thinking is my role here.
Chris, to just talk a little bit more about that musical production, How important do you think it is that the school board overturn their original decision, and what kind of narrative do you think that sends to the community?
I'm not going to get into the politics of it because I still work here in Cedar Grove, and but I will say, how important was it that the show went on? It was enormously important, considering that what we see going on in schools today, where folks are going to Board of Ed meetings, they're attacking the inclusive curriculum, they're attacking transgender students. There have been situations where I have been attacked by community members in Cedar Grove because of my role in the union advocacy I've done. First, it was with COVID and having to make sure that the schools were safe, and then putting in the curriculum mandates, the Amistad curriculum, the LGBTQ curriculum, and obviously on statewide I played a large role with advocating for that down in Trenton, and then helping some districts and some organizations to bring it into some schools and to pilot a program and to show that it works and to show that it could work. So that played a role. That these students, sent to the community that, look, we are important. We're going to stand up for what we want, and these messages and this kind of content is important, and it's important to be heard.
100%. And I think it really says something that, when students are coming forward and fighting for what they believe is right, it sends a great message to the community, and I'm glad to hear that. Can you also talk to us a little bit about your work with the SOGI Committee and what SOGI is for at NJEA, and what work you're doing with the union?
This is my third year as the chair of the SOGI Committee. And what is our purpose? Our purpose is to represent and to be NJEA's eyes and ears on all issues that are sexual orientation and gender identity, LGBTQIA issues. So our role is to advise NJEA on its policy in those areas, to make recommendations to the Delegate Assembly, which is the governing body on these areas. We plan a conference. Last year was the first LGBTQIA themed overnight conference in NJEA's history. And we made a decision to name it after Carol Watchler, who is a legend when it comes to advocating in our schools for safe spaces and for these issues. She's somewhat of a mentor of mine and somebody I really idolize. She's a member, and being able to honor her by naming the conference after her and the work she's done, having her there to see it was very special. And then at the conference, having we had over 100 members, but 2/3 of those members had never gone to an NJEA conference because it catered to something that that we don't typically do. So we oversee the conference. We plan and march in the parade in Asbury Park. We assist locals if issues come up in organizing around LGBTQ issues. And a lot of stuff. I think some of the things, the projects that we're doing, and we have done over the last year or two, we've worked with the Uniserve division, which is basically the advocating wing of NJEA. They're the ones that do the bread and butter, negotiate contracts and adjudicate situations with members. We've worked with them to create a sample contract language that is inclusive. We're working with them right now to create an advisory for field staff on how to assist LGBTQ members. Look, we're a labor union, we're here to protect our members, and that has to be on the forefront. So those are the things, a list of things that we've been doing. I love the group. I have to say, shout out to my committee. I think they're the most fabulous committee, and they're very hard work and engaged. We always show up, we're always there, and they do a great job. I really love working with them.
That's awesome. I think one thing that stood out to me, though, is that you said that for some NJEA members, that was the first conference, the Carol Watchler conference, that they attended, which I think that's, first of all, that's really great that we were able to engage them, but it's also sad that that's the first time they really got involved. But I'm happy to hear that, and I hope that for pre-service educators out there, they know that they are also able to attend, and they should come and listen to those workshops and speakers and be part of that community. So thank you.
Yeah, when I took over as chair a few years ago, I remember talking to some of the committee's members who were on the committee for a while and asking them, hey, what do you see as the role? And we want people to see us not just as the fun people that do parades and do, celebrations, but we want them to see them as people who are advocating. And I think having that space, we purposely made it advocating conference. It's about advocacy. It's about fighting for our rights, standing up for who we are. What could we do to protect our members of these issues? And we didn't make it about professional development. Professional development is important. It's, obviously a large part of what we do. And we wanted to provide an advocacy space.
Chris, the committee sounds like it's doing an excellent job with advocacy work, and that's incredible. And I want to get a little bit into practices in the classroom. I'd be interested to hear your view on this and the committee as a whole. So obviously there's been a lot of pushback recently against LGBTQ inclusive curriculums for elementary school students. And the concern is that those topics are not necessarily age appropriate. And so what do you think about that statement, and also the committee as a whole? And maybe what's some reasoning that you think might be behind that idea of it not necessarily being age appropriate?
So, and this is something that I deal with all the time. One, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of people hear of LGBTQ and they think it's all about sex, and it's not. We are people. This is our identity. This is who we are. And we have to be able to teach young children. Do we need to teach them what all the letters of LGBTQ are as a kindergarten? No, they can understand it, and it's above their head, and it is inappropriate. However, what should we be talking about kindergartners? We should talk about kindergartners who ask, why does John have two dads or two moms, right? And what's the answer to that? Because there are all different types of relationships, because love is love. That is what younger students can understand. Some folks want to kind of weaponize who we are and blow things out of proportion to what they're not. It's not about teaching inappropriate things to young children. It's about teaching tolerance, acceptance, and there is a way, and I think there is a way on every level where our issues and these issues can be incorporated. Talking about what the rainbow means. Well, you don't have to talk about, the rainbow is the LGBTQ, it's about the LGBT community. No, how about the rainbow means tolerance and acceptance? And the rainbow, each color means something different. Each color means that each person is somebody different. Each person could look different. Each person can act different. Each person can love different, right? And for instance, and it happens. It's happening now. There are young children who have supportive parents who, maybe it's a girl who wants to go and play with the trucks and rather play with the boys and rather not wear a skirt, right? Well, why doesn't this girl wear pink? And why does the girl prefer wearing blue? Those are conversations because it's okay for that girl to wear blue and to play with trucks and to play with the boys. It's okay, right? Same thing with a little boy who wants to play with dolls. It's okay. We don't need to fit into these little, traditional boxes. I think it's about providing spaces where students can develop as they will. Now, I will say, look, it's not appropriate for teachers to guide these people, and that's not what we're doing. That's not what staff members are doing. And when I'm doing trainings with staff members, I always tell them you have to be careful. Let the students bring the issues to you, particularly older students. It's inappropriate for a staff member to go to a student and ask them about these things. However, if a student comes to a staff member, we need to be able to have an open mind, to listen, and to accept a student for who they are. So those are some of the practices. And when it comes to books, books are sometimes the best way to have these messages for younger children, right? Because these are big concepts. I get it, right? And I think embedding them in books that children can understand, with stories that are not inappropriate or dealing with inappropriate things, maybe dealing with friendships, maybe dealing with who you play with, and some of the other things I talked about. I think that's enormously important.
100%. And I think that, piggybacking off of what you said, I think this is something that is important for all kids to learn, no matter no matter their identity. I think it's something that everybody should be like have an awareness and an acceptance of.
Absolutely. And I think, and unfortunately, look, kids don't learn hate, right? They don't. Kids pick up things because they see them. And they should have the right to be able to kind of choose their own path, of their likes and their dislikes. And sometimes I think obviously society has set a blueprint now that's thousands of years old about how a little boy should act and how a little girl should act and when they grow up and what they should do. But we've changed what they grow into, right? Where we don't have a society where we expect women to stay in the kitchen and cook and clean and take care of babies. I think I hope we're past that, so we should change how those gender roles are expressed, on every age level. I think that's important. And again, it's not about, I think it's more important to give the children freedom, right? That's what we're saying. Give them freedom. How we do have a standard set of ways that people behave, when it comes to sex, as far as their biological sex. And that's okay too. However, when a student starts to deviate, it's our job to protect that student and not make that student feel like other.
I could not agree more. I mean, I'm sure we both agree that making students feel included is something that starts from such a young age that they pick up on standards that we set that are set by our teachers, and it's harder to undo that as they grow up. But if we create that space earlier on, then it allows for us to create a more inclusive learning environment as they go through their K through 12 education. So I'm kind of wondering if in your own class as a social studies teacher, if you have ever taught an LGBTQ inclusive lesson and what that might look like specifically.
I have. I teach world history. It is one of the most difficult subjects to infuse because people were not out back then, Mm-hmm. So teaching contemporary history is a lot easier. And also teaching, I think, in literature, there are literary figures who are queer that you could teach about. But when it comes to history, and particularly world history, it's very hard. Obviously you have some of the older ones, but it's just people were not in the closet. And obviously if people were queer, they were thrown in jail, or they were, there were consequences. So people didn't come out. So some of the things we can in my class, what I teach about, is Castiglione's Book of Couture. Okay, that book that is he wrote that during the Renaissance, I believe. He wrote that on how males and females should behave and how they should act in the court. Right? And a lady should act this way, and a gentleman should act this way. That's a good teaching opportunity to talk about gender roles, right? To talk about how, look, this is what, literally they made a book on how you act, hundreds of years ago. Is that the same today? And how do we define gender roles today? Because they're being redefined. So in that particular, there's one case like that. When you talk about the Renaissance, now obviously there are some Renaissance figures who are known to have been LGBTQ, known to have been gay or queer. So obviously you talk about those people, and you mentioned that these folks are who they are. There is, I think on different levels, you could go deeper. I think with literature, you could go deeper. How do they portray queer characters? Is it a fair portrayal of queer characters? And math, we just want to make sure that when you have word problems, you're being inclusive, right? That you're not always talking about one male or one female, that, you're not always talking, and not just inclusivity about queerness, but inclusivity about race, about other situations. Science, I haven't figured that one out yet. No, there are ways in sciences, obviously, Obviously we could talk about the biological debate over sex, and folks like to say, well, there are only two biological sexes, which is actually not true, because then you have folks that are intersex, and maybe you have a discussion on how does that happen? Because intersex folks are part of our are considered part of our community.
I think that adds such like a broader perspective too to the material, that's why it's so important to include this history, even if it's not from current times. Like you mentioned the book from the Renaissance, like it's something that adds so much more perspective to the time period and like how it relates to now. And even as you said in math, like I'm studying math education, and I have definitely started thinking about ways that you can be more inclusive. And like you said, word problems are such an easy way to be more inclusive, like just by using like a name that like has not like cisgender pronouns, or saying in an elementary classroom, like, Jamal's dad bought him 3 lollipops and Jamal's other dad, Henry, bought him 5 lollipops, like something like that, where it's very, very simple. So thank you for sharing that.
Chris, you talked about, including pieces into your world history curriculum about how gender has been structured across history. And I think that's really important that we're including that. I wanted to ask you, what do you remember about your social studies classes as you were going through, elementary school, middle school, high school, even in college? Did you see any of this included in your classes? And now, is this why you're sort of trying to infuse it into your own?
Yeah, well, a little backstory. I didn't come out till I was 29 years old. So, so I had an issue with recognizing my own, who I was. So I sure did not see it. I did not. It was very traditional, and like I really don't even remember having any. Obviously we had one person who was in the theater program, kind of having a trope here, but who everybody was like, oh, he's gay, and he ended up being gay, and I'm actually friends with him now. It was kind of don't ask, don't tell. It really, this will be my 30th reunion coming up. I'm actually helping planning it, and I'm thinking back to that time, and I don't remember us being overtly like, using the F word, but I don't also remember having to deal with that. We never talked about it. So it was just like with my family. My father had an uncle who was gay, and he lived with a man. And I remember when I was growing up, they would come, my Uncle Frank and Uncle Al. And I thought Uncle Frank was my father's brother, and I thought Uncle Al was because we called him Uncle, so I thought he was the other brother. And years later, many years later, is when we first had the conversation. Well, Uncle Frank and Uncle Al were together. It's like, really? I thought they just were friends and lived together. No, really? Come on. And so folks of your generation, I think, are a lot luckier because you're exposed to it a lot more. And we see that in the number of youth who are willing to identify themselves on the queer spectrum. And they're having a conversation of, well, you know what, I kissed a boy, or I kissed a girl, obviously same sex. And even with my nieces and nephews, they've all talked about it, that they have, and they don't consider themselves bi, but it's not something that is stigmatized in your generation. And I think I'm kind of waiting for your generation. Hopefully I'm around to, kind of be the ones running things so that it would get a little better. Yeah. And again, it has gotten better since I've been young. Obviously all of the advances we made that I've seen, overturning Don't Ask, Don't Tell, marriage equality, other protections that are there. But, for all of that stuff, we still see, the Supreme Court ruled recently that, under certain circumstances, LGBTQ people could be discriminated against, so got a lot of work to do.
Definitely. But I think that starting conversations, especially in schools with children, is like just one way that you can start the advocacy work. And sometimes I feel like if you don't have that conversation, like don't ask, don't tell you, like don't talk about it, then you're just sort of perpetuating that idea that it's not okay to talk about people who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. It's like they are not normal and they're not part of our society, which is not okay, which is why we need to be having conversations about it. So what do you feel that our school systems can do to improve visibility for our LGBTQIA plus students?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question.
Yeah, that's true.
Because what you're seeing right now is you have boards of eds who are being taken over by folks that folks that want to undo the progress that we've done. Okay, particularly for transgender students, and what they're doing, and I don't know if it's unintentional or intentional, is they're making it unsafe for all LGBTQ students to feel free in those schools. Okay, so the one thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we elect people to boards of education who will make sure that their schools are inclusive places, that are not going to buy into the rhetoric, buy into what has been going on. I mean, look, we all know that the reason why this has come up, it's a political thing, right? They're politicizing what's going on in schools because it wins points, right? Because folks who are like me, we're trying to indoctrinate kids, and the other unthinkable terms that we've been called, and it makes it unsafe for folks who are advocating. So and it's just like you said before, if you can't talk about it, and that's what they're trying to do. Make no mistake, they're trying to make sure that nobody is talking about LGBTQ people, because it's okay as long as you're not in our face, as long as we're not having conversations about it, as long as you don't hang up the pride flag, as long as you don't push that on me. They're trying to, and even some cases, I've actually seen people who swear that they're LGBTQ supporters. However, going after transgender people, hey, you're level 1 gay and lesbian. They're fine. I have gay friends. I have lesbian friends. But what's up with But then go around attacking transgender people, saying that they need to pick a sex and that they don't exist and that they invalidate who they are. That's where we need to start. We need to start to make sure that our schools are being are overseen by people that don't bring this hate into our schools. So that's number one. What do we need to do? We need more professional development. I will tell you, the Amistad curriculum, which was the one of the original mandates 15 years ago, that hasn't been implemented. Properly in many schools. So the LGBTQ one, which is only a couple of years old, and I remember I was at the State House several years ago, just about 3, 4, 5 years ago, testifying about it. It's a slow burn. I know in my district they did make efforts. They do. However, we still do have administrators who don't prioritize it. And we have teachers who don't feel comfortable. Like imagine if as an LGBTQ person, you're not comfortable in a school existing, right? Imagine people who don't know the issue, how they're going to be about teaching it, right?
Yep. It's a real problem, and it's something that, teachers also need to educate themselves on and be sure that they are able to be a support system. And just as you were talking, I was thinking back to Leadership Summit from this past weekend, and, one of the keynote speakers, Dr. Jackson, I think he used the phrase institutionalized lovelessness. And just as you were speaking, I was thinking about that phrase and how applicable it is that, we can't choose to love certain members of our society and shut out other people. That's not the right norm to be setting.
And I think that is a great phrase. And I didn't hear it. I had other things throwing some of the plenaries. But institutional lovelessness, I love it because that's exactly what some people want. When you say, oh, they should only go to school to learn the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, that's it. That's all they should learn. We're not creating a prepared society, right? What is the job of schools? Our job is to get students ready to go into the real world. Well, in the real world, okay, not everybody dresses and acts the same, okay? Not everybody looks the same. And another thing, like that whole love list thing is when people say, I don't see race. It's the same thing, right? It's, I don't see race. Of course you don't see race. And when you don't see race, you're seconding or lessening who people are. And I think, and again, it's a way of stopping the conversation. We don't have to talk about race issues because I'm not racist. If I don't see a problem, it doesn't exist. And often that's too much in our society.
Chris, you mentioned before that, a big struggle is having people in power, like on the Board of Education or a part of the administration group of the school, who are just not in support of these inclusive practices. So what might be the harms for a student who is suppressed, by their school from expressing their genuine identity?
Well, the unthinkable. I mean, the harm is unthinkable. Is that LGBTQ students we know, and I don't know the specific statistic, but I know they are more, much more likely to try to commit suicide. Okay, they are much more likely to run away from home. They are more likely to take drugs. And I know some folks are like, well, they'll turn it back on some transgender students and say, well, that's because transgenderism is a disease. No, it's not. The disease is your hatred towards these people. When you have situations where these folks are supported, where these folks are loved, they thrive and they do well. Well, in situations where they're not, they won't. So that, and that's what it's about. And that's what we always have to remember. Schools are here for students, okay? They're not here for anything else. And if we're not loving all of our students, if we're telling students that well, you can't act a certain way, or you have to fear being outed, which is a big problem. If you have to fear being outed if you come to the school, you're not going to have healthy students, and it will bleed into other populations. It won't just be LGBTQ students. Maybe it'll be the student who has a little bit of a weight problem. Maybe it'll be a student who can't hear. Maybe it'll be a student who has acne. By providing safe space for LGBTQ students, and a lot of LGBT students tend to be more visible. Like for the most part, some of them who are having issues are ones who can be spotted, or ones who are, maybe they act a certain way and they're being attacked because of that. And then sometimes they may not even be LGBTQ.
100%. And sometimes I feel like those students are, like students who are struggling with that need to have someone at school, like a trusted adult that they can speak to. So, for us as pre-service educators, what would you recommend is like the best way to support a student if a student opens up to you about an issue that they're struggling with, like in relation to their identity, but may not necessarily feel safe at home to embrace their identity? Like, how do you deal with that kind of situation?
I think just being there and listening, and you affirm them. You don't try to talk them out of being who they want. That's dangerous, right? Also, make sure you're aware of the laws in your district's policies. I want to protect you in a union sense. For instance, it may say that, maybe you have to bring in a counselor or somebody else, if that's the case. In a student teaching situation, I would always make sure you bring in, if the student's comfortable, you bring in the lead teacher, and have those conversations. But I think the most important thing is if a student's telling you who they are, it's because they feel comfortable with you. So affirm that. Say, I'm here for you. It's okay that you have these feelings. It's normal. Things like that. I think that's enormously important. I think validation is one of the most important things that students are looking for sometimes. It's just to be validated and their existence to be validated. And again, going back to laws, just make sure that you understand what the laws are. If the student's in danger, that you have the proper reporting tools for that. Because we want to make sure that our students are protected, and that in protecting them, that we're doing the right thing legally.
To go along with that idea of making sure students feel validated in the classroom, how would you recommend, pre-service educators and educators create inclusive lesson plans that allow their students to see themselves in the curriculum that we're teaching?
Yeah, there are a lot of resources out there. I know Make It Better for Youth is an organization in New Jersey that worked with Garden State Equality, which is the lead advocacy organization in our state. They organized a pilot program right before COVID, and that pilot program went into 12 different schools, and they coached folks on how to implement lessons. And what they did is they put together a link of resources. And I don't have it. I believe if you were to go on Garden State Equality's page and search, you'd probably find it. If you were to go and Make It Better for Youths, and you could Google both of them page, you'd probably find the link to those resources. And in fact, I believe if you go on NJEA's page and you go down to the SOGI page, I believe that link's there too. So use those lessons. I know that what I would do is, if I'm uncomfortable and I don't understand, is ask for professional development. Go to some professional development opportunities. I think that's what I would say, because maybe you don't know what all LGBTQIA stands for, and all of the other letters. But maybe you don't know, and maybe you don't know what pansexual is. And I'll be honest. Up until about 6 years ago, I didn't either. Maybe you don't know what some of the other things that students like to identify themselves as are, which I'll be honest, sometimes I don't know, because I'm not a spring chicken, and youth tend to lead the way, just like the retaking of the term queer. In recent years, it's young people who did that. It was a term that was created by the community during the urbanization eras. And see, here's a history lesson. During the urbanization era, and they owned that term, and it got made to be a derogatory term later on when folks they were using it in hate. And then that term was taken back. It started to be taken back during the AIDS epidemic, where folks were identifying as that. And in more recent times, young people like that term because they say there's too many letters. But and then you get some of the older generation who still resist using the term queer because it was used in hate towards them.
Thank you. I want to ask you one more quick question, before we wrap up here. But I'm curious, in addition to this curriculum and the advice that you imparted, in your classroom, is there a way that you show visibility, in your classroom decor? Do you have pride flags in your classroom, or is there pushback about that too? Well, how do you show that physically in your classroom?
Well, first of all, I always wear this. I wear this badge. This is from the NJEA LGBT caucus. So a little shout out to them. And it, obviously it tells everybody I'm always wearing this. I'm out. Everybody knows who I am. I'm, I guess, a mild public figure because of this advocacy. I've been in the newspaper, fighting for not just this and other issues. I do have a pride flag hanging in my room, even though I don't do the GSA anymore, and I refuse to take it down. There were parents who were upset. And my administration stood behind it. Say, look, Chris has got the right to hang that flag, to express who he is. So one of the things I do in the beginning of the year, how you usually do those surveys to find out about the students. Well, here's one pitfall I'm going to give new educators is right now it is danger to directly ask students what their pronouns are. Okay, you could get yourself in trouble. So you can indirectly ask them. So for instance, I ask my students, and by the way, I think it's bad practice as an educator for educators to go to students and say, hey, what are your pronouns? No, let them come to you. That's important. Let them come to you. So what I do when I do my introductory activity in the beginning of the year is I say, tell me 5 things about you that you want me to learn. And I'll tell you what, nobody else is going to see it. This is only between you and me. And I'm going to ask you to, I said, put on the list 1 or 2 things you're going to share, because we're going to circle around the room. And I model for them. Here are my 5 things. I'm a gay, proud man. My pronouns are he, him, his. So I model. I put those 2 things on my list. I love to travel. Okay. And then whenever I decide to put in the list for that time of year, and then the students do that. And then I also ask the students, what name would you like to be called? Right. Because my name is Christopher. Call me Chris. I don't have the students call me Chris, but I have my friends call me Chris. So if you're Steven and you want to be called Steve, if you're Gabriella, you want to be called Gabby, if there's something else you'd like me to call you. Those things, if you do, it's kind of a safer way, and to allow the students to open up to you, to allow the students to tell you what they want. And I know some folks have gotten in trouble for asking for pronouns and directly asking for pronouns, especially if you don't make it optional for the students.
That's a great activity, though, and it still allows students to open up to you and share their identity in that way if they'd like to, but also they don't need to do that. They can also provide different fun facts about their life that they would be comfortable sharing in the classroom. But I like your mentality of letting students come to you, because I feel like you don't force it with a student, and you're also just building a stronger connection and just letting them see you and who you are presenting in how you're presenting in the classroom, but also just letting them be themselves in however they are comfortable.
Yeah, because there could possibly be a transgender student who knows it inside, but if you require them to give their pronouns, may feel forced to give the false ones. Mm-hmm. Right? So, you got to let them do it at their own pace.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. This was a really meaningful conversation. I appreciate it a lot, and I'm sure our listeners who are pre-service educators really appreciate it as well. You gave a lot of really great tips and advice for, navigating this in the classroom and in our school districts.
Yes, and can I ask you to say the first part of the LGBTQ plus acronym for anyone who is uncertain of what those letters stand for?
Oh, now you're putting me on the spot. No. Another brief history, too. It used to be GLB, right?
Yes.
Gay, lesbian, bisexual. Okay? Then during the 80s, when a lot of the gay men, particularly, were getting sick with AIDS and dying, it was the lesbians who were taking care of them in the communities. So in the 1980s and in the early 90s, they switched it to LGBT, put transgender in there too. Obviously, some folks have added the AI and plus. So it's L, lesbian, G, gay, B, bisexual, T, transgender, Q. Some folks say questioning. I queer, questioning or queer. I like to think queer. A, asexual. I, intersex, and the plus is for everything else. But some do you just use the term queer. That's again up to where your comfort level is.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we at least spelled out that acronym for anybody listening and who wasn't familiar with it, just as a wrap up and a conclusion. But thank you so much for this conversation. I can't even tell you how many things sent chills through my spine as you were talking, because I feel like this is something I'm passionate about. So it was a really nice conversation. Just hearing your advice is going to be helpful to so many pre-service educators. So I'm excited for everybody to listen in.
Well, I want to thank you two again and say, keep up the great work. I kind of wish I had gotten involved in union advocacy at a college, and it wasn't until after my first 3 or 4 years, which is another story, that I got involved. So stick with it. We need folks like you to, come in and bring fresh faces into our leadership and show, the young people why being part of a union is not just about paying dues and negotiating contracts, but it's about protecting folks who are marginalized, and you can't have a union that is not centered in social and economic and racial justice.
Yes, exactly. Ditto, I don't know, elevate that a million times over. Yes, but thank you so much for joining us, Chris, and we really appreciate you coming on today and speaking to us. It's a great part of our advocacy work with the podcast, so I'm excited. But yeah.
Thank you so much to everyone who's listening to us. We appreciate you being here. Look out for more of these longer length episodes where we'll have a guest come in and speak with us about hot topics in education right now. And also look out for our Motivational Monday episodes releasing every Monday. And that's just going to be shorter episodes with Bianca and I discussing different topics.
Yes, thank you everyone. Have a happy Thursday.